Give me a minute and let's talk about the lessons of history. In 1917, at the height of Imperial Russia, in its beating heart, St. Petersburg, a group of wives and mothers went out onto the streets in an effort to get what little food there was available after 3 years of war. This was the Great War, or what today we call World War I. And when ordered to fire upon them, the local National Guard, if you will, for want of a better word, the army officers refused to fire on these women. This began the Russian Revolution. Within a few months of these events, 2 million Russians walked off the Tsar's battlefield and refused to any longer abide by the evil notion that there was such a thing as the divine rights of kings. And the Romanov dynasty was tossed into the trash bin of history, where all such evil belongs. In the late 1980s, after 10 years of war in Afghanistan, the women of the USSR took to the streets with banners protesting, wanting their sons and fathers and brothers returned. This led to a series of events. 3 years later, the Soviet Union simply ceased to exist. The dominoes are falling again, the same way they did 106 years ago and 36 years ago. The women of Russia have had it. It began with the creation of an organization called The Way Home. And this is a group of women, the mothers, sisters, daughters of mobilized men who have been at the front for 15 months, women who haven't seen their men in 15 months, while they watch as convicted rapists, murderers, and even cannibals go fight in the war, get pardoned, and return home to do evil against them again, while their men are stuck there, mobilized indefinitely. All promises of rotations and weekends away ignored. The women of Way Home have released a manifesto in which they say, we're being betrayed and exterminated by our own people. We were screwed over and you'll be screwed over. We were punished for our law-abidingness. Behind the smokescreen of stability, our men pay with blood and we pay with our health and tears. Now, just to be clear, these are not women protesting the war. Many of them, I'm sure, support the war, like all good Russians do. But they recognize the fundamental injustice of how their men are being treated in this war as cannon fodder for the imperial ambitions of the Kremlin. And they want their men protected and they want justice for them. They have taken to the streets repeatedly every time the government has shut them down. The authorities come in, the cops come in, and they throw them into paddy wagons, take them away. Further to this, the ISW, the Institute for the Study of War, which is a Washington, D.C.-based think tank, has said that the Kremlin likely considers the relatives of mobilized personnel to be a social group that may pose one of the greatest threats to his campaign, meaning Vladimir Putin's special military operation. And with good reason. The folks at the ISW understand history. They study history. And they see it maybe not repeating, but it's certainly rhyming. For its part, what has the Kremlin response been to these women? To declare their group fake, not to take their legitimate concerns seriously and address them in a way that would make sense to any rational person, no, but to vilify them in the press and call them tools of Western propaganda. They've sicked Solyov on them. And on his nightly talk show, he says their task, meaning the Way Home group, is to hit where it hurts most, exploiting the feelings of the wives of our fighters with the help of these women to undermine trust in the authorities, to destroy our unity from the inside. In other words, they're traitors. The women and their men who complain about being sent to their deaths to satisfy Putin's ego, they're the traitors. Solyov has produced a slick video in which women who claim to be wives and mothers of mobilized men call these women their enemies. The enemies of our country are trying to make you into a weapon against our motherland. Other groups have cropped up, likely funded by the Kremlin, who say things like this, accusing the women of Way Home, the women here, who on their phones are telling their husbands at the front that they are fighting to get them home. Oh, those women, the women of Way Home, they're just adulteresses, right? They've cheated on you, men at the front. This is the way that they vilify the true patriots, the people who are trying to preserve the lives of their fellow Russians and make sense in this senseless war. And this is what the Kremlin does to them. Tells their husbands at the front that they're being cheated on. I mean, that's the way to keep morale up, right? You got to be kidding me. This piece of reporting was done by the Kyiv Post. You can see the watermark up there, the name on it. If you don't subscribe to the Kyiv Post on YouTube, or if you don't watch these reports from the Kyiv Post on YouTube, I strongly encourage you to subscribe over there and watch the full report, because the full report does a much better job than I do in just my response, my outrage to this, to slander the faithful mothers, sisters, and wives of the men at the front who are fighting with their own Ministry of Defense, having lodged an estimated 180,000 complaints since the start of the mobilization 15 months ago, against the unfair practices that have not only resulted in the deaths of likely close to 200,000 mobilized Russians, but have turned the society upside down and are driving it to bankruptcy. We're watching a cultural suicide being driven by the Kremlin lies and this vilification of their own people for wanting a little simple justice. There are reports, these are unverified, but there are reports that the Kremlin is also trying to buy off women, offering them cash to not join Way Home. Clearly, the Way Home is for the men on the front line to turn their guns on their commanders and on Moscow like Eugene did and change the power structure in Russia, not through this upcoming election, because that's a scam where Putin is bound to win no matter what, but rather by the only thing the Kremlin understands: force of arms and revolution in the streets, led for the third time by the women of Russia.